After the end of World War I in 1918, many U.S. veterans who fought in that conflict petitioned Congress to pay them a bonus for their wartime service. In 1924, Congress passed a law to pay them such a bonus, but that promise was never kept. Thousands of veterans from World War I marched on our nation's capital in 1932, protesting their mistreatment.
It's war, the greatest concentration of fighting troops in Washington since 1865. The veterans give way unwillingly, and so they're being forced out of their shacks by smoke bombs and tear gas hurled by the troops who have been called out by the President of the United States.
This bonus army was eventually driven out by U.S. troops under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. The American Legion, created by war veterans to help other veterans and their families, witnessed this disgraceful episode in our national history and vowed not to let it happen again. As World War II still raged in Europe and the Pacific Theater, the American Legion went to work, lobbying Congress to provide benefits for 16 million veterans who would be coming home and deserved the benefits of peacetime. They needed someone back home to champion their cause. Enter the American Legion, led by one of their former national commanders, Harry Colmary. In December 1943, he sat in his room at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C., and wrote out in longhand the first draft of what would become known as the GI Bill of Rights. This document became the American Legion's legacy, creator of the GI Bill, that guaranteed home loans and college educations to America's returning GIs. This kind of legislation was a revolutionary idea in our nation's history, and the GI Bill was destined to make radical changes in America's future. Throughout the early months of 1944, a committee of Legionnaires pushed Congress and President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration to pass the GI Bill. The American Legion drummed up public support for the bill in newspapers, movie theaters, and radio broadcasts. At one point, it looked like the entire program would be killed, deadlocked in a congressional committee, on the verge of being defeated. The GI Bill needed only one vote to move forward, and the American Legion knew just where to find it. Congressman John Gibson was recuperating from an illness somewhere in the state of Georgia. He had to be located and brought up to Washington in time to cast his vote. The American Legion led the search for Gibson, drove him in a stormy night to a plane waiting in Jacksonville, Florida, and flew him up to D.C. Sick and exhausted, Gibson got to the committee meeting just in time to cast his vote in favor of the GI Bill. In so doing, Gibson guaranteed that 16 million veterans would have the chance to buy their own homes and go to colleges and universities to earn their degrees. President Franklin Roosevelt signed the GI Bill of Rights on June 22, 1944, while U.S. soldiers fought their way across France, closing in on Adolf Hitler, and while U.S. sailors and Marines fought their way across the Pacific, destroying the remnants of the Japanese Empire. But when the war ended in 1945, and millions of troops returned to civilian life, they soon took advantage of the GI Bill's amazing benefits. Many of them got jobs, got married, bought houses, and raised families. But 8 million other veterans decided to go to school with a free ride paid for by Uncle Sam. All those veterans getting their college degrees changed the American landscape forever. They got better jobs and higher salaries. They contributed to a tremendous economic boom in the United States, and became the first wave of Americans to experience that middle-class phenomenon known as suburbia. For every dollar our government spent on the GI Bill, it eventually got $7 back in return. Not a bad investment.